Good morning, everyone. It is Friday the 13th, and we have Valentine's Day weekend on the way. And with it, we got a storm system that we're watching coming out of the west and moving to the east as we get into the Sunday time frame. And with it, we'll probably see mainly rain with this particular storm system. Last week, we were looking at the potential for snow at one point. It looks like maybe at the far northern end of the system, we could see some lighter snow, especially as we get into the day Monday around the Mason-Dixon line. But before we do that, I do want to discuss our current storm track. Now, where you see the darker green here, this really determines where we have the jet stream, typically set up here, moving from west to east. I know it's a very jagged line here, but just try to follow along with it. Um, where you see the hilltops, that's typically where we see the ridges that are set up. And with it, we have warmer air. But where you see the V shape, that's where we have the trough set up in place. And you can kind of make this out, right? Moving from, let's say, the Pacific here with that high pressure of 1042 here off the west coast. And then if we look at, let's say, the high pressure over the Intermountain West here, broadly speaking, that's where we have another ridge set up. One of the things I do want to kind of make clear here is that we can have these short waves that kind of break off the main storm track. And that's bringing in some mountain snowfall to places like, let's say, Arizona, New Mexico, and even Colorado as we get into the day Friday and Saturday. But behind that, still, we have a reinforcing shot of cold air. We have another short wave that will be moving in on shore, let's say in the northwest as we get into Saturday and Sunday as well. And we can kind of make that out here on the map. Again, just to the north and west of Seattle, we have this next shortwave coming on shore. And that's going to bring us another chance of rain and snow as we get into Friday night and Saturday morning. But I do want to mention this stubborn trough that we have off to the east here. You can kind of see it diving into New England, that area. And we've had reinforcing shots of cold air basically from the middle part of January until what is now the middle part of February. So nearly a month, right, of cold, consistently cold weather here. And it looks like maybe by the middle part of next week, this ridge that's over the Great Plains will finally be able to push off to the east and hopefully bring some moderating temperatures to places like the Midwest, also New England, where we start to get some of that melting in place. But before we get there, again, we have that storm system coming through this weekend into early next week, and that will likely bring a chance of snow to parts of the mid Atlantic. So we'll begin discussing that next. So, what I've done here is I've zoomed into the 500 millibar heights. Again, this is the middle troposphere. And where you see the warmer colors again, that's where we have the warmer temperatures associated with the ridge that we have east of the Rockies here. Now, when you get into the yellows and the greens, it's not certain that these temperatures are above freezing. Sometimes it's still below freezing if you're in a trough pattern. Now, I do want to show you guys that when we get into middle of next week, again around Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe, we're seeing these darker greens move further and further north into the lower 48. So that means from southern portions of Minnesota into southern portions of New York, we will likely have temperatures above freezing. And we're talking about even 40s getting into parts of South Dakota, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and perhaps even as far north as Connecticut, places like that. So we could see some warming here enough to actually start melting the snow and ice that we have in these places that have been experiencing that trough the past month. However, if we go back to Saturday, when we can actually see the current picture and we look at the trough, let's say over the southwest, we have cooler temperatures again diving into the southwest. And likely with it, we're going to have the development of a low pressure system somewhere over the southern plains. And after the system develops, what it will do is begin to push off to the east. And with it, we'll probably get a large area of moderate to heavy rainfall over much of the south. And we're talking about an inch to maybe an inch and a half of rain all the way to places like the Carolinas and southern portions of Virginia. So if we move this forward in time, we can kind of see that trough begin to push east of the Rockies as we get into the day Sunday. But also pay attention to the northeast and where a high pressure system could set up. That's going to supply any remaining cold air to the mid Atlantic and perhaps change some of that rain over to very wet snow. So moving into Sunday afternoon and then eventually Sunday evening, you can see how the greens are actually kind of pushing down east of the Appalachians. That is that cold air damming likely that will be taking place during the storm system Sunday into Monday. And the northern end of this will likely be cold enough, at least in the mid levels of the atmosphere, to support snowfall. And we'll probably see a few inches of snowfall in Northern Virginia, Maryland, Southern Pennsylvania, places like that. And then, meanwhile, off to the west, you can see how the ridge is building back in place behind the storm system. And the thing to remember about these short waves is that they are short lived. And whatever cold air we do get with the storm system, it's usually gone the next day. And there's usually large scale melting that takes place for any snowfall that does accumulate. So I would imagine places such as Northern Virginia, Maryland, you'll likely see your snow melt the next day. And then beyond Monday, we can see how these warmer colors, right, begin to move into the central plains in the southeast. And in fact, let's draw out this ridge just to get an idea of its relative position across much of the United States on Tuesday. However, off to the west, if we look towards the states of Washington and Oregon, you'll notice that we have these lighter blues and even some darker blues as you get into Washington State, Oregon, and even Northern California. And with it, we're going to have additional chances of rain and snow. And some of these snowfall elevations are going to be reduced to about 2,500 feet, even down in California, maybe around 3,500 feet, with these colder temperatures moving in overhead. So yeah, we could see not only heavy snowfall, and we're talking about 2 to 4 feet of snowfall through Tuesday in California, but also those snowfall levels dropping down pretty low, right? But I do want to mention there is a bit of uncertainty here, and this is something I would listen to your local broadcast for further updates on because, again, if it drops down to 3,500 feet versus 4,500 feet, we're talking about more of those mountain passes, right, receiving the snowfall. And that could affect your travel into states such as Nevada or even moving further north into Oregon as we get into early next week. Looking at the jet stream early Friday morning, you can easily make out that dip in the jet stream over California. One thing I want you to pay close attention to here, though, is that over time, that wave begins to break down in intensity. And that's going to impact the development of a low pressure system downstream and how well it's able to strengthen over time. So beyond Friday, and just kind of moving this forward into Saturday, Sunday timeframe, you have a general idea of where that shortwave will set up. You can kind of look at this open area here in the jet to see that dip that's taking place. And likely as we get into Saturday, there will be some development of a low pressure over the southern plains to the south and east of that dip. And beyond this point, we can see how that wave begins to break down even further. However, we will have the development of a low pressure system to the southeast of it. So, somewhere over the south, maybe in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, that area, as we get into Sunday morning. One thing that will really help it is this jet stream that's positioned to the north and east of the developing low pressure system. One thing that I had talked about previously in a video was being in the preferred quadrants of the jet streak. And this low pressure system happens to be in one of the favorable locations in the equatorward entrance region. So let's kind of mark that as a double capital E to kind of represent that. So the equatorward entrance region. But there's multiple factors affecting this developing low pressure system. However, the temperature gradient around it's not going to be significant enough to maintain the strength of this low pressure system. Um, If you have a steep temperature gradient, let's say going from 30s to maybe 60-degree temperatures, that can help maintain the lift within this low pressure area and actually support the development of showers and storms and actually deepen the low over time. So the only thing really that's going to be aiding this developing low pressure system is that jet streak off to the north and east. Now, what happens beyond Sunday? One thing that I hope becomes apparently clear is that along the west coast, there is a big dip in the jet stream. The jet stream itself is actually flowing right into Southern California. So, this again is an atmospheric river situation where we could get a tremendous amount of moisture going into the higher elevations of California. And with it, we'll likely have heavy rain and snowfall throughout much of California. In fact, if I were to rewind this back briefly and just kind of look at that purple region, you can see how it builds over central California with time and then eventually over Southern California. I don't think we'll get as much rainfall as we saw back at the end of December around Christmas. And some places picked up 6 to 12 inches of rainfall in that really strong storm, right? Or atmospheric river that came through Southern California at that time. However, we could see a couple of inches of rain, maybe 2 to 3 inches of rain along the west coast of California. And we're not talking about in an isolated area, we're talking about all along the west coast of California. So I think a good place to start here for the forecast map of the potential radar, at least, is Friday afternoon. And this is Friday afternoon Eastern time, so maybe Friday morning along the west coast. We can see, in fact, rain and snow moving into Washington state and maybe northern portions of Oregon. We can also see rain and snow along the Intermountain West and the Four Corners region, and possibly a low pressure system trying to develop somewhere along the southeastern quadrant of that trough. And just as a reminder for you guys, that trough is somewhere positioned, let's say, over the southwest of the United States at this time. And again, that's bringing in that energy for the rain and snow that we're seeing around the Four Corners region. And over time, the precipitation over the west coast begins to kind of die down. But over the central plains and southern plains, we're seeing that low pressure system begin to develop and bring rain to places like Texas, Oklahoma, even Kansas and Missouri as we get into Saturday morning. And this only begins to spread further to the east as that low pressure begins to deepen and strengthen over the southern plains. Now, I do want to point out that there is some lighter moisture over the state of Oregon, and it's kind of ahead of that trough, that secondary trough, right, moving into the west. So this is kind of like a precursor to that, what you're seeing in Oregon at this time. But meanwhile, that storm system over the south is delivering moderate to heavy rainfall, maybe some embedded thunderstorms over parts of the south. And I think the areas that could be receiving thunderstorms, southeastern Texas and to maybe southern Oklahoma, parts of Louisiana, Arkansas at this time. Now, beyond Saturday and into Sunday, again, heavy rains continue over the south, moving eastward into Mississippi and Tennessee. We could definitely have severe weather just to the east of that low pressure system. So that's just something to keep in mind as we move forward in time. But as we get into Sunday morning Eastern time, again, this is probably mid morning in the west, we can see rain begin to move into much of California. And this is really the start, you guys, for that heavy rain that's going to continue from Sunday into Monday and then eventually into Tuesday for Southern California, where we could see several inches of rain, right, for you guys. And this storm system that we're seeing over the south is a pretty big deal in itself. We're going to have a widespread area of an inch to an inch and a half of rainfall that occurs with this system. The last thing I want to kind of point out here, too, as we step this forward even further, is this blue line here. And around this blue line, which is the 540 height line in the middle troposphere, that's around the boundary there where we see a transition from rain to snow. So once the rain or the precipitation here begins to move into that zone, we'll start to see a changeover from rain to snow. So as we move into Sunday afternoon, we can start to see that rain change to snow in Northern Virginia, Maryland, and southern portions of Pennsylvania. So as we step this forward in time, we can see snowfall extending from Stanton and Harrisonburg, Virginia, maybe up to Hagerstown, Maryland, and then also maybe Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. So all that area along Interstate 81 could pick up 2 to 4 inches of snowfall from this system. And even DC could get in on the action as we get towards Sunday evening and then even overnight Sunday. One thing that you'll be able to see here, I guess, on the forecast map is that there is a rain snow line here. So there's going to be a cutoff here in the amounts of snowfall around the DC area. So maybe to the north and west of town, that's where you'll pick up the heaviest amounts of snow. On the south side of town, you might see a transition to rain early. So you might pick up a half an inch to an inch of snow, and then it makes that transition over to rain. And there's always the chance that this is all rain in DC. There's not going to be a whole lot of cold air being supplied from the north this time into the system. In general, snowfall amounts are going to be fairly light. This one model that I've been showing you guys, the European model, is showing a general 1 to 2 inches of snowfall in the mid Atlantic, where it is cold enough for snow to fall. Now, there's going to be a clear cutoff in the precipitation somewhere around the Mason Dixon line. And more than likely, it will be cold enough in southern Pennsylvania, much of Maryland, and parts of northern Virginia to receive light to moderate snowfall. And where you see the lighter blue, that's your best chance to pick up 3, maybe even 4 or 5 inches of snowfall once the system moves out of the area. As you saw earlier in the video, we're talking about rain and snow over the Northwest during that Friday to Saturday time frame this weekend. And there is a chance of about a quarter to a half an inch of rain around the Seattle area. And the same thing is true around Portland. We could see a quarter to a half an inch there. That hard terrain along the coast, those areas will probably pick up the most rain. So if you're in the Olympic range there along western Washington state, you guys could easily pick up an inch of rainfall here. In the Cascades, not as much snowfall this time, but I do want to point out that snowfall levels could drop to as low as 1,500 feet this time. So all of the mountain passes are going to receive snowfall if it were to fall at all. So we're talking about a general 6 to 8 inches of snowfall along the Cascade Range of Washington state. But the biggest story here is going to be in the Southwest. So the last time we saw rain like this was back in late December. And now, as we hit into the middle part of February, we're going to get a tremendous amount of rain once again. And this is just through Tuesday of next week. We can see with this trough moving on shore that we could have the potential of 2 to as much as 4 inches of rainfall in places. And this is not just confined to the coast, of course. This is also extending into the Sierra Nevada. And where you see these red areas here, such as what I'm circling here in Northern California, that's 4 inches of precipitation that could fall. And likely where I'm drawing it, it could be in the form of snowfall. So we could see upwards of 4 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada. As far as the major cities here, whether we're talking about San Francisco, down to Los Angeles, even San Diego, all of you have the potential for 2 inches of rain and perhaps even greater in some areas. And just to kind of drive the point home for you guys, where you see brown on this map, this is about 2 feet of snowfall in the Sierra Nevada. Anywhere else where you see pink is about a foot of snow that's being projected by the European model. And in general, we have a large area over California, right, that could receive over a foot of snowfall. And even the high mountains in the southern part of the state here, in and around Los Angeles, could pick up close to a foot of snow. We even see some brown areas down here that are indicative of at least 2 feet of snow. This, of course, is not going to be confined to California. You can see much of the Intermountain West, whether we're talking about the states of Nevada, Utah, Colorado, down into parts of Arizona, Flagstaff, that area, could pick up a foot of snow as well. And just to show you the setup for next Tuesday, again, this is the 500 millibar heights. We can see this dark blue moving into the West Coast region. And with it, we're going to have colder temperatures and additional chances of rain and snow. Even behind it here, I hope you guys can kind of make it out on this map. There's another pink and blue region back here, just to the west of Alaska. And what these are these short waves that are moving along that storm boundary we were talking about before. And each one will continue to dive into the west. And all this is due really to the ridge that's positioned here in the Pacific. That's helping to drive these storm systems in and around this high pressure system. And these are diving into the West Coast and will continue to bring rain and snow to that region over time. So, how long will that ridge be in place? So, going beyond next Tuesday, the 17th, we can kind of see how it just kind of stays there, right, in that same position, even as we get into the 19th. And as far out as the 22nd, that high pressure system is relatively strong, right, staying there in the Pacific. I do want to mention that there is something downstream that is of note. So on the 22nd, if we look up towards Greenland, you'll notice this green area that's protruding into Greenland. This is called the Greenland Block. Now, if we have, let's say, these waves that begin to move off to the east and they run into this blocking feature, what it will do is begin to build cold air in Canada. And even at this time, here on the 22nd, you can see over parts of northern Canada that we have these very low heights, right, relative to the rest of the north. And this region here could begin to spill into the United States over time once this ridge comes on shore. And it will over time, right? Beyond the 22nd, at some point, that ridge you see over the Pacific will move into the West Coast. But through the 22nd, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So, at least for another week, looks like we're going to have a very active storm track for places all along the West Coast. So, if you live in Seattle, if you live, let's say, in Portland, Los Angeles, down to San Diego, all of you guys are going to get additional chances of rain and snow coming up. We could be looking at a surplus this winter instead of a deficit. And that is very good news for you guys. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video and our talk about, again, the 500 millibar heights and how that kind of plays into the storm track and also the placement of these storm systems, right? That are delivering the rain and snowfall across the United States. Now, it looks like for the short term, we're going to have ridging in place over the east. That means warmer weather, right, in general. Less of that snowfall, right, that we were seeing in January into early February. It looks like we're going to have a trough, right, building into the west and these short waves, right, moving along it. Whereas in the west coast, we're going to likely have these short waves moving in one after another, right, delivering these chances of rain and snow over time. So that'll be something we're watching over the next week. And I'll let you know if anything changes. But again, it looks like that strong ridge is going to stay off the west coast. And with it, we're going to probably have that trough pattern in place over the west coast, at least through the end of February. And guys, if you did like today's video, please leave a like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And I'll see you guys Monday for the next video. Bye for now.